Managed mentoring for getting started in beekeeping. This is Swarm Basics. I am Kevin England. In this lesson, we'll introduce swarm basics by providing some background information and exploring the timing and catalysts for swarming in the Mid-Atlantic region. Swarming is natural propagation of a colony. It has to take place on the colony level. No individual bees can split off and create a swarm. When a swarm casts off from the mother colony, the daughter colony that results has the queen of the colony with it. The queen leaves the hive and leaves daughters behind to take over. If nature has its way, every colony will grow strong and cast off a swarm to reproduce. For us beekeepers, however, we would prefer not to see the queen and 50% or more of the workforce fly away, because that's the force that is going to make a honey crop for us. Beekeepers need to be able to recognize the indicators and triggers of a swarm in progress and attempt to keep it from flying away, and we've devised methods to do so. Not always successful, but there are opportunities for you to do management practices that can thwart swarming. During the study of swarms, you'll hear a bunch of different terms: prime swarms versus secondary swarms, late season swarms, and the term absconding, which is similar to a swarm but different. A prime swarm is the first swarm as intended by nature. Occasionally, a colony is so strong, and with the daughters, multiple, left behind by the queen, it's possible that the colony may decide to cast off additional swarms and send the virgin daughters off to reproduce in nature. Late season swarms are just a phenomena that occurs, and beekeepers recognize that in a time when you would not conventionally see swarms, swarms can cast off. Absconding is usually an event that occurs when bees dislike what's going on inside the hive environment, or there's pressures from varroa mite or something else. Maybe a predator is trying to get into the hive all the time and they decide they're going to leave and go find a better place to live. As beekeepers, one of the things that people try to figure out is when does swarming occur. If you're going to do swarm management, you need to recognize when to look in for the indicators and take the action that would prevent swarms from casting. Using New Jersey, where we're from, as an example, we know that anywhere between April 1st and April 15th is the traditional start year on year for swarms, and it would continue through to July 4th or mid-July. Whether you live north or south, the usual time frame for swarming is up to a month early down to Georgia and a month later up to New Hampshire and Vermont. And the wave starts from Georgia and comes across to Virginia and Maryland and up through Delaware and so on. And so sometimes you can watch online for what's going on and see people starting to report swarms for their region. Now, what happens is swarms follow biology, meaning if there's an abundance of resources, the bees will kick in and start to rear brood, and that population, along with drones, allow them to muster to be able to be viable for swarming. And the weather obviously plays a role too. So get aligned with your zone. Ask around to your local beekeepers, when do you think the traditional start is? We did a study in New Jersey, and we know from the study data over a period of years that the time frames that we communicated, April 15th is the traditional start to swarm season in New Jersey. Following suit of knowing when swarms are going to start, it should be recognized that swarms are not a surprise. If you work it backward from the time that the swarm casts off, and you could inspect the operation of the colony and what they're doing, there are many clues that you can follow that gives you advance notice that a swarm is or isn't imminent. In the next couple of lessons, when we do indicators and triggers, we'll cover those. But it's important for a beekeeper to recognize that swarms are not a surprise. They're an event in the making, and often as a beekeeper, if you become familiar with what those signals are, you can understand if your colony is under threat of swarming. Here I want to talk about something different. Not an observation of what you see the colony doing, but conditions that lead you to understand whether you will or will not have a swarm. These inputs, the first one is, if you had a super strong colony in fall going into winter, and it did well through winter, it would obviously have the workforce to jump on the nectar flow and get a good start to the point where it can reach everything it needs to kick off the swarm mechanism. The second one is if you have an older queen. Colonies tend to have a behavior, a pattern. If you have a second or third year queen, they tend to be more swarmy. If you put in a fresh queen after the summer solstice, and it's the first spring the queen is going in, chances are that hive will not swarm or be less prone to swarm than, say, a second or third year queen. Another indicator that has nothing to do with the bees is simply how good is your forage availability in the early spring. If it's one of those years where spring breaks early and every tree, every flower, every plant is in bloom and things look just spectacular, you can imagine that the bees are going to take advantage of that bounty, grow very quickly, and that is another indicator of swarming that has nothing to do with the actual colony makeup. In this presentation, we covered a couple of the simple basic things about swarms for a typical colony. In the end, though, there is one key that has to happen for a swarm to occur. The queen will lay eggs. Those will be converted over to queen cells, and the eventual queens that emerge will need drones to mate with. And so, while the forage may be good, while you may have had a good colony coming into spring, and the other factors that we talked about, the number one thing to look for is swarm season will start soon after you see drones being reared in your colony. This lesson was just a couple tidbits about swarm basics. Going forward, we will get a little more in depth when we talk about what the triggers are for the bees, what the indicators are that you can look for, and we'll talk about the ways in which you can attempt to slow a colony down and or prevent them from swarming. If you have questions about this lesson, you can ask at our next online session.